Well, you know, you can't talk about blues without talking about Sarah, Molly, and Mandy. Who are these ladies? Well, the Sahara Desert, the country of Mali, and the Mandi people. That is where a lot of the blues comes from. And we're going to find out more about this. And we're going to show you some fun little instruments that take us back to the roots of the blues. The Tuareg are the traders who dominated the Sahara and who influenced African culture far beyond their homeland. The Tuareg women are renowned for their poetry singing, accompanied by playing on monochord fiddle called the imjad or the anjad. And it can be played either vertically or horizontally. I won't try to do the singing, but it's something like, ah! It's blues. All you have to do is change the words to some of the words that we have in our blues, and you've got the blues. And those guys had the blues. In fact, the blue men had it even more because they had blue on their cloth that we wrapped around them, and they turned blue. So the blues is from those guys. I mean, that's the proof. Another African instrument that was influential in early jazz was a plucked instrument. There's different kinds of them with a skin covering with 4 strings or less. This is kind of like a lyre or a harp, but it was something that was used as a rhythm instrument, and it was something like this. It's sort of typical of that area, the East Sahara. Okay, so imagine you're in the Sahara Desert, and we can see if this really is a blues axe. I saddle up my camel, going into town. I wrap my turban around me, but I'm feeling really down, 'cause I got the blue man blues. I'm just as blue as I can. from there now. I don't know. So we've been talking about skin-covered instruments. These things are different shapes. Big, huge, round ones, little ones. They're all over the Sahara area and below that. These lutes have been common among the ancient Egyptians, the Hittites, the Canaanites. It was often made of gourd or calabash and would have 2, 3, or 4 strings. This type of lute is found throughout northern Africa in many forms and various names. One of the most interesting of these names is bunchundo, or the Mandi term bango or banjalo. Okay, and let's see if this really is. If that's not a banjo, I don't know what it is.
Another thing from African heritage was drums. This is a North African drum, and the interesting thing about it, it has strings on it to make it sort of sizzle when you play it. I'm going to show you a couple of typical African rhythms that came to New Orleans and were played by famous New Orleans drummer Baby Dodds on the bass drum rim with 2 sticks playing the same beat together. Why? Because they would have a row of drummers. So they wanted to hear the 2 different sounds at once rather than just one guy playing. So they were looking for that sound, and that's how they got it. And this is a typical beat from Northwest Africa that came to America. Another pattern that Baby Dodds used was this one. Where did we get the bass drum from? Well, that came from the Turks, because the John Philip Sousa military bands were developed from the Turkish marching band centuries ago when the Turks would attack a village in Eastern Europe. The band would be heard for miles away and everybody knew the Turks were coming so they could flee their village. That music was kind of scary. Everybody said, well, let's have our own version of the Turkish music so we can scare the people in the next village, extend our power. So Europeans started to use the Turkish military music. Eastern European and Western European military bands were developed on the Turkish model with the bass drum, which was something like this. It was called davul in Turkey, and it was played something like this. Okay, you notice they have these strings here that rattle. It used to be just a stick that would rattle, but then they said, well, why don't we have the strings do the rattling, and then we can use the stick for other things. And so that's where we got these strings across the bass drum, which became the strings that are across the snare drum. And so when you hit the snare drum, you can hear sizzling going on underneath. Okay, so that's the idea. The snare drum is actually a small version of the bass drum. But the big bass drum itself is still there, and you can see the similarity, except they used to use ropes to hold it together. And I'll play the other Turkish main instrument that went with it, called the zurna. The zurna is a double reed instrument similar to the oboe, but a lot shriller. Okay, so that's where we got our marching band, our military band, our parade band. Instead of the zurna, the clarinet took over. They had trumpets like they did in the Turkish band. And then we added the trombone, and we also added the cymbal, which was a Turkish instrument, and the triangle. So actually the instrumentation for early jazz came from the Turks through the Europeans. The rhythms came from Africa, and the syncopation came from Africa. They actually say the word jazz is an Arabic root that means to cut short, or maybe to speed up, or possibly syncopate. And so also in the marching band was both the snare drum and the bass drum, both from Turkish influence, the cymbal from Turkish influence, clashing or clanging, and the triangle, which we don't see much anymore, and the jingling Johnny, which was a staff with bells on it. We don't see that much anymore. So that were the roots for early jazz.
There's a lot of things we have in this country came from Africa, and we can be happy because that's what makes this country kind of swing compared to Germany and England. Anyway.